What's going on, guys? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. New patch just dropped. Finally, the Hog Nerfs are here. First changes to Orisa. The Fortify health bonus has been reduced from 125 to 75. While she'll be a bit more killable in Fortify, remember the massive buff that she got was on the range of her primary fire, with the intention to compete with Roadhog at the level he was at to like stabilize the meta somewhat, which is a job I don't think Orisa's gonna need to be doing. And actually, her matchup against the other tanks gives them a lot more opportunity to play the game, characters that you likely were afraid to even attempt to pick, with Roadhog being a viable swap for the enemy. In the context of the rest of the meta, I would say Orisa still will do her job. Losing 50 health means she'll be killable against other things, though with her cooldowns being able to cycle so well, I don't think that's so important for when you play her well in the position she's good anyway. I don't know if the overall health will be noticeable so much, considering you can't get headshot and Fortify, and you can cycle your javelin spin into your ultimate as well, which, keep in mind, this Fortify nerf applies to the ult too, so it is a bit of a double nerf. But overall, I think Orisa's relative strength was going to go down regardless due to Roadhog being much worse. Here's the nerfs to Roadhog. Chain Hook's impact damage has been reduced from 30 to 5, and the enemy final position distance from Roadhog after being pulled is increased from 3 meters to 4 meters. That alone would have hard nerfed this character to an outrageous degree, because that would mean a lot of characters, even with the old damage numbers, would feel impossible to one-shot kill. This requires new techniques from Roadhog players to step into their shots after pulling a character in. And while the 25 damage on the Chain Hook might not look important, it certainly does add up in conjunction to you losing burst damage on his primary fire, which is the next set of nerfs. The scrap gun's damage per pellet has been reduced from 6.6 to 6, but the recovery time does go up a bit to compensate. A small fire rate increase from 0.85 to 0.8. His reload time as well has been reduced from 2 to 1.75, and his maximum ammo has increased from 5 to 6. We've already seen this version of Roadhog many years ago, and if I recall correctly, this is actually 2 different iterations of Hog they tried in Overwatch 1 that they're now putting into the sequel, which is a little sour to me, because they were making it seem like there was technical limitations for them to be able to put the new Roadhog changes into the game, and I thought that might mean they were trying something new, but it turns out they're repackaging an old rework to Roadhog that they tried for a short period of time in Overwatch 1. Faster fire rate, much lower peak damage, more consistent damage over time, but is that really what you need from this character for him to be viable? Now, yes, of course, contextually, with the rest of the game, Kiriko still exists to cleanse him, so he retains some of that uncounterable tankiness and insane self-healing and almost like self-fortification. Popping a Suzu on Hog while he uses Take a Breather sort of feels like a Fortify effect on him, really, with the way it's going to prevent crowd control from hurting you while you're healing. So I think we've kind of never really understood the full ramifications of what Suzu plus Breather did to the character to make him go from a big poppable balloon, he was considered terrible for the first section of the game, then Kiriko gets added, skyrocketing him to solo queue prominence. In my opinion, this version of Roadhog will make almost every other tank look more viable for every other job you can imagine. His weapon works a bit more sort of like Junker Queen's gun. She's going to be considered a better version of this character as far as I'm concerned, because it's not like lots of the tanks struggle to do damage. No, they all can. It was just Hog was the one that could actually snipe and play in the one-hit kill metagame. Well, now he's not really one-hit killing anything, and there's just better options in the tank category to deal this type of damage, where it's like consistent and can add up over time. I just don't think he has the cooldowns to justify this playstyle at all. And I'm struggling to think what matchup he's even going to really thrive in. The really only X factor he's got is the hook. So I think he'll be relegated to CC combos. You'll need the full comp to chain CC or cooldown dump into a tank, I think. in order to get the same kills you got before. With 25 pellets in Roadhog's scrap gun, the old damage value of 6.6 meant that it did 165 damage. Hitting all headshots made him do an astronomical 330 damage, which is doable into like a Winston's head or another tank, or a chunkier DPS hitbox like Reaper even. Keeping in mind, the hook itself attaching would do 30 damage, and you can add in your own melee at the end for the big combo, not even needing any headshots on a squishy with the old version. Now, at only 6 damage per pellet, the total damage will be 150, which yes, can be all headshots potentially dealing 300, but keep in mind you're 25 damage less on the hook itself attaching. It only does an extra 5 instead of 30. So you're looking at somewhere between 155 and 305 if you're lucky, plus an extra 30 for your melee. It's easier to look at these numbers on paper and say, okay, in theory, he can still one-shot a squishy, but it's way harder to do now because the target is a full meter away from you when you pull them in, which makes it way more skillful if you ever dream of pulling that off. And there's some targets where you physically won't be able to do it just based on the hitbox size alone. Ana, for example, with her slender hitbox, has a super high chance to tank it. Now, my knee reaction is this character is gutted, or at least the old version of what we expected him to be able to do roaming around solo queue games and solo carrying. But this drastic of a playstyle change typically means he's going to suffer massive underperformance, even if there is a new way to play him, which would probably play around more so punishing enemy aggression into the hook for combos and making use of how tanky Hog is for quite a ridiculous ultimate. Self-healing to get it. That is rather unique, but with other crowd control options or higher damage numbers or protection for the team, it's just hard for me to think why you would ever pick Hog. Like, is an Orisa Spear, Doomfist Punch, or Junker Queen Knife not enough CC for your tank? Funnily enough, Hog's CC isn't really the thing that defines him anymore, when it used to be in Overwatch 1, a rather rare ability. Now a lot of the tanks got that. It was his pick-off potential that set him apart, but now that's pretty much gutted, and he's another brawler now, effectively speaking. The developers explained the Hog changes in saying this: these changes aim to reduce the frustration of dying in one shot immediately after being hooked and pulled by Roadhog. Chain Hook is still a powerful utility to forcibly reposition enemy players, so it will still often lead to eliminations. Its effectiveness will now be more dependent on specific hero matchups and how the hook target is able to respond. With him gutted like this, my anticipation is that hook cooldown's gonna need to come down a lot. It might as well come down to the 6-second mark, which it was originally in Overwatch 1, by the way, but will also then match Energy Javelin and Jagged Blade. Massive Sojourn changes. Railgun energy no longer is based on damage done by primary fire. Each primary fire hit against an enemy player now grants 5 energy. And the primary fire damage per pellet or projectile reduced from 10 to 9, back to where it was originally. But she looks to still retain the spread increase from back then. This is important because now Mercy's damage boost no longer helps Sojourn get her rail faster, which I think is a detail a lot of players didn't even know. It's not just the one-shot breakpoint that it was really powerful with Mercy, it was getting the rails more often. The 1 extra damage on her primary fire matters too because it can headshot, fires pretty fast, so that damage racks up and made her more spray and pray and gave her too much value, like similar to what Soldier should expect to have when it comes to just pressuring and tracking. The bigger spread on it, I felt, made it just feel dumber. One of my bigger complaints about the Sojourn problem is like they just keep reorganizing the way her kit feels. Meanwhile, they were adamant about making the railgun hitbox easier to hit, which I think that was one of the major reasons why the rest of her became sort of unbalanceable feeling, where they had to take her down so many notches now. So everyone can feel like they can hit a headshot. Well, then she lost the slow and losing cooldowns and other things here or there. The developers explain the Sojourn changes like this: the energy drain adjustment will help smooth out Sojourn's average railgun charge time because it won't benefit as much from critical damage or damage boost abilities. Hitting armored targets or other sources of damage reduction will result in quicker energy gains than before. Previously, damage boosts and critical damage had an amplified effect for Sojourn since it reduced the time to build energy and lowered the threshold at which her railgun secondary fire became lethal. The reduction to primary fire damage will further slow that down as well. The language of this section is a little weird because it says it won't benefit as much from critical damage or damage boost abilities. Well, it literally won't help you to go for headshots if you're trying to charge the rail. Now, you'll do more damage, obviously, but aiming for the head with her primary fire now is a bit of a weakness if you're trying to get the railgun. So now she's way more punishing all of a sudden. But I think overall, the primary fire spread was to the point where you're not really trying to get headshots with it unless you're really close anyway, because it's got the kind of spread that you're just not controlling. Like, you gotta shoot it towards the center of mass, and some shots would hit the head. So it's not like you were being accurate with it to begin with, but in theory, you might now prefer to hit more reliable shots of damage rather than go for spamming at headshots, maybe like on a tank, if you think the spread is going to deviate away from the hitbox and miss, because you just want the primary fire to hit now so you get up to the rail. Because especially with it doing 9 damage instead of 10, I think you're going to notice that you can't lean on that primary fire spam as much. Because we remember Sojourn at 9 damage. She had a bunch of other changes, but that was the original version. And we sort of felt like that damage was negligible. But at 10, it actually kind of racked up. Like, you could mow things down like a budget soldier as well as have the railgun for one-shot kills. And because it fired so quickly, you often would be able to either finish up or you already injured the target you hit a railgun on. So the 195 damage number was kind of just irrelevant. Like, it's still almost a kill, and you've got another way to deal an extra little bit of damage anyway. So that principle will still exist. She'll still be running and gunning. She'll still get the benefits of damage amp on the railgun. So Mercy Pocket on Sojourn will still be good, but will she be the most dominant DPS in the game, at least for her skill ceiling? My anticipation is she will be good still, because her kit as a concept with a Mercy attached is insane. Now, will you feel like you need the Mercy? Probably, because with these damage numbers, the other ranged characters will probably be able to do more than you, or at least be even against you, right? After the changes to Railgun, it really opened up Widowmaker in an interesting way, because there was very distinct ranges now where after that rail fall off nerf previously, well, now she's not that great at range at all, but it kind of doesn't matter because nobody can hit her. Her movement and AD strafe is so nuts. She's gonna distance control anyway, but she won't contest at least the Widow at long range, sniping the rest of your team. Last change for the patch, healing Afuda's recovery time has been increased from 0.85 to 1 second. So 0.15 seconds of extra delay or recovery in between being able to cast Healing Afuda again. The developers say, despite Kiriko's healing projectiles being slow moving and single target, her average healing output per match is higher than we'd like. We've seen players tend to get overly focused on maximizing her healing potential and only use primary fire for an extended period of time, as in the healing Afuda, neglecting the kunais. Rather than reduce the amount of healing per projectile, which may lead to feeling locked into focusing on primary fire even more, we're increasing the recovery time before she can start firing the healing Afuda. Increasing recovery times opens the opportunity to weave in secondary fire kunai more freely, because you got to be doing something in that time, at least if you're trying to maximize the character. I think this is a really interesting change, and as a Baptiste player, one of my heroes that got me to GM Season 1, you can't play him in Season 2 so far anyway, because of the sniper meta. It's terrible in that. But one cool thing about Baptiste is a lot of it is based on your multitasking. So you work your position and you get in this really fun cadence of picking who you heal and who you shoot at, because you have to sneak in an action if you're trying to increase your APM. And that kind of mechanic really makes for a support gap, because if you are multitasking and the enemy isn't, it's like you're 20% more of a character just by pushing an extra button and launching it in the enemy's direction, right? Now, that being said, I think that sort of hurts the skill floor a little bit, and Blizzard is trying to put their finger on the scale of how players play, and the truth is, metal rank players don't maximize Batiste as it is, and overly focus on healing. They're still gonna do that as Kiriko, and it's gonna just be a nerf for them. So while the healing of Fuda has been the thing I've been whining about because it's just so much pocket healing at range, trying to focus anything is infuriating against a good Kiriko who either can duel you herself, appear out of nowhere, and heal from range to take a target that was on critical to fully pocket them up. And there's so many damage types in the game that become irrelevant because you can't out damage healing a Fuda. Well, can you now? Still no. Yeah, the overall heal numbers are gonna go down. For sure, healing to get your ult again takes another hit, which they've been attacking that heal bot for ult playstyle over and over again. I'm kind of mixed on how I feel about this. I think it both raises the skill floor and the skill ceiling, making her harder to access, but also gives me an interesting thing to maximize myself when playing her. I just think it's gonna be kind of hard for you to find the gaps where this matters too much. Granted, they're not even really selling this as a balance concern. They're saying we want it to be good to kunai more. Well, the truth is they're hard to hit. So you shouldn't be kunaiing at things you can't hit, right? It's when you're locked in a duel or you're sniping down a lane, weaving in pressure to try to find a headshot. That's what it's all about with the kunais. And so, yeah, now you sneak one in after every healing of Fuda just to keep your APM maxed out. But you kind of were doing that anyway if you were good at Kiriko, I feel, because somebody's got to be applying pressure to the enemy. I'm not saying you should flank necessarily, unless you're super nasty with it. The thing I don't like is I feel like they just missed the point of why you can't go out kunaiing most of the time, and it's because there's a lot of bad targets that you shouldn't really even attempt to fight because there'll just be a waste of your time just based on the mechanics of how kunai works. You need to get the drop on somebody so they don't expect you, or be locked in a no escape situation, which Kiriko can often escape anyway because she can teleport through walls and Suzu herself, or spamming down lanes between fights. Something to notice though that might drop Kiriko's power this patch is when there's tanks that have abilities that block for them anyway, those tanks don't need Suzu as much. Because Hog was defenseless with a big meaty belly to just eat up any cooldown, Suzu gave him an entirely new ability. And while Suzu's just always generally good and is fine, you may not prefer it to other support options if your tank already can say, or shield, or defense matrix, and anti-grenade. I feel like the player base forgot how to outplay anti entirely, and they just walk into it casually because they just expect a Kiriko to be on their team to cleanse it for them. But a meta might evolve where if your tank actually tanks, you might be able to use other support kit rather than feeling like you need Suzu to interact and keep your tank up. Kiriko's heal botting just on that alone will change because of the meta change. Because there's better healers in the game, particularly ones that have other healing abilities like 4 seconds of on-a-nade on your tank or Batiste regenerative burst. These are some insane tank healing abilities. And cleanse is insane, but it was more insane on Hog, who could heal himself and had his own healing ability. Tanks with defenses might just prefer more healing so that they can keep their armor health, which Hog didn't have anyway. So you see how that works out? Where a armorless tank with his own heal ability prefer to have a cleanse to keep him up. Well, Roadhog, he's out of the picture as far as I'm concerned. A armored tank that has their own defensive kit that can be used to self-sustain or block disables, they typically prefer to have higher healing numbers. If that all pans out, this patch could be pretty fun to play. Because if we can get back to having tanks that aren't just thick DPS, that we can heal, well then you can play faster than the sniper one-hit kill metagame would allow, which I think was the case in Season 1, where most people would have said Widowmaker wasn't that good. This patch is pretty impactful with multiple top-tier heroes getting nerfed at the same time, and no real compensatory buffs. I mean, you know, Hog got reworked a bit, but net nerf for sure. So the balance hierarchy is definitely changing. And to make sure you don't miss out on our upcoming videos, be sure to leave this video with a like, and don't forget to click subscribe and the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.